Okay, so welcome back. Today we are going to continue our series, our YouTube playlist, where we're talking about Microsoft Excel and spreadsheets. And specifically, we are talking about a really amazing feature of Microsoft Office and Excel in particular, where it includes a complete programming language where you can automate all of the processes that you do on your spreadsheets. And if you've ever worked on spreadsheets before, you know it can be a lot of steps to go through and do some data manipulation and charting. So we're going to show you how to write a very simple, what's called a macro in the programming language in Excel, and that's called VBA, or Visual Basic for Applications, that's included in Excel. We're going to show you how to write a very simple macro. And what it will do is it will take some data, you select the data and you tell it, hey, chart this data. And it will go through and automatically format your chart, put it into your spreadsheet and set it up the way you like to have it normally set up, and save you quite a bit of time, especially if you have some very complicated spreadsheets. And what I've got here is I've got a very simple Excel spreadsheet with 3 columns of data. And let's say that what I want to do is I want to chart this data on a chart inside this spreadsheet. And here we have 3 columns. Let's say the first column is like time values, and then B and C columns are different values we want to chart over time. And what we're going to do is we're going to run our macro, what's called a macro, and it's going to go and automatically allow us to select the columns we want to chart and do a chart. So let's run the macro. And the first thing it does is the macro puts up this user interface control. And this is another really amazing thing about the programming language in Excel called VBA. It also includes what are called user interface controls. And if you've done any programming before in like Visual Studio, we've done many videos on this channel about programming in Visual Studio and C#, Windows Forms. This is a very common Windows form control that asks for user input, and those are included. You can access those in Excel VBA and have many different types of user controls. We're going to have a separate video talking about that in the future, but in this case we got what's called an input box, and in this case it says select first column, and we'll go over here and say, okay, the time column, which is A column. And you can see it automatically says, oh, you want $A:, $A, which tells Excel you want everything in that A column. So we'll hit OK. And then it says, okay, now select the second column that you want to chart. And we'll choose either B or C. Let's say we want C. And again, it says $C, $C. And we hit OK. And immediately, it charts those 2 columns. Really nice. It goes through and it formats it. It says, okay, I want a line chart. You can select column chart or what other format chart you want. It also formats the chart. It gives it the size we want, which it almost fills up this window here. And it places the chart where we want it. It also has no titles, no legends, the way we want it. So in one press of a button, it goes through and charts it the way we normally want to chart things. And if you've ever done charts before in Excel, you know it can be kind of tedious. You have to go through and select the data, format the chart, and this can save you a whole lot of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select this chart we just added, and I'm going to make it a little bit smaller and move it out of the way. And I'm going to run our macro again and see if we can chart the other column. So I'm hitting run on our macro. It says, okay, select first column. We're selecting A:, and then select second column. We're selecting B, and it goes through and it charts the other column. So now we can, on the same spreadsheet, we can have 2 charts and we can compare them. Really nice. And all it took was the touch of a button to do this automatically. So let's take a look at the code we're going to need in order to do this. Now, before we get into it, let's keep in mind the things that we've had this do. The first thing is we had it put up some what are called user interface controls that ask the user to select the column. So we're going to have to somehow figure out how to do user interface controls. And once we've got that, it's going to have to take the resulting range of data. And you know, in VBA and Excel, ranges are really important. So we've selected ranges of data. It's going to have to take those data ranges and somehow feed them into the code we're going to need to generate a chart. So let's take a look at the VBA macro that we're going to use for this. So here we are in the IDE, Integrated Development Environment for Microsoft Visual Basic for Applications. And I encourage you to look at previous videos to show you how to get this set up. And here is the simple code that we're going to need to do the automatic charting. So of course, to get here in our spreadsheet, we go to the Developer tab and hit Visual Basic. We showed you before how to get this Developer tab. It's not there by default. But anyway, we'll go to Visual Basic. Here is our IDE for Visual Basic. And the first thing we're going to do is insert a module so we can write this code. I've already got it here, but to get there, you right-click on the project and insert and module. And once you've got that, we can just add this code to do the charting. Now, as we talked about before, we start out with option explicit. That requires that we define all of our variables. We don't let VBA assume what the variable types are. That's really important. So we've got basically two parts of this, two subroutines. We've got the main subroutine, sub main and end sub, and then sub create chart, and we're going to feed it some values, and that's the end sub. So we've got two subroutines, and then we've got some dimensioning of some variables that are going to be available to both of these subroutines. So the main is where it's going to start out when we run it. And all it's going to do is it is going to put up those two input boxes and ask the user to define the ranges that it wants to chart. And there's only 2 lines required, so very nice and very simple. So the first thing is going to be where we access that input box. And what we're going to use is we're going to use the application.input box. Now you can add a default input box, but the application.input box has more functionality. So we're going to refer to the application.input box, and we're going to feed it a couple of variables. The first thing is we're going to have the prompt, which says select first column. It tells the user select first column. So that's the prompt. And then we're going to say that it's going to return a type 8 value. Now, to find out what that means, we can select this input box and hit F1, and we should get some help from Microsoft Excel Developer Reference. And here are the different variables that we can access for this input box. And we're doing the prompt, which is a string, the message to be displayed in the dialog box, and also the type. And the type specifies the return data type. And we said type 8. And if you look down here, type 8 is a cell reference as a range object. So one of the wonderful things about this is we can say, hey, select first column and return to me a range that the user is going to input. So really, really nice and easy way to get a range from the user. And we're going to set column 1, which we have defined as a range, and we're going to do the exact same thing for the second column. We're going to return a range, and that's going to be column 2. So wonderful way to get the 2 ranges that the user wants to chart. And then once we do that, all we have to do is call this subroutine down here called create chart and feed it those 2 ranges and say, hey, chart this range and this range. Very, very straightforward and easy. So the workhorse here is going to be the subroutine called create chart. And it's going to take column 1 first cell as range. So we're specifying it's going to input a range, and we're going to call it column 1 first cell as range, and then column 2 first cell as range for the second column. And it's going to take those 2 ranges and chart them. So this sub charts two columns in an XY scatter line chart. You feed it the first cell addresses, for example, A1 of the two columns of the chart, and it automatically determines the range of data in those columns and inserts a chart into the spreadsheet. We're going to define column 1 full range as range, and then column 2 full range as range, and we're going to define those later. And then we're going to define the chart range in as range. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to determine what the range is to chart, which is what is the total range of actual data in that column. So we're going to say column 1 full range is range, and we're going to take column 1 first cell, which is what we input when we call the function, and then column 1 first cell dot end XL down, and that allows us to take the first cell and the last populated cell by using this dot end XL down. It goes from this A1 and goes all the way down to the end of the data and returns that last cell. So now we've got the full range, which is the first cell to the last populated cell, and the same thing with column 2. We get the range of the column 2 first cell and the last cell of populated data. So now that we've got those two ranges, we can say chart range in is application.union. What this does is it takes those two ranges and does a union, or it takes both of those and returns a range which includes both of those columns. So column 1 full range and column 2 full range, you do a union, and that is everything that we want to chart. Once we've got that, now we can actually add the chart. We know what the range is, and we can add the chart. So here we're going to add and configure the chart location, size, type, and source data. So we're using a with statement, and all that does is it makes it a little bit easier, so you're going to have to keep typing, in this case, ActiveSheet.ChartObjects. Everything after this with, we're going to assume it's ActiveSheet.ChartObjects.something. So with ActiveSheet.ChartObjects, now keep in mind that what we're doing here is we're adding a chart onto an existing worksheet or spreadsheet. There's another way to do that, and that is to have your chart on a separate worksheet tab by itself. We don't want that. We want to add it to an existing worksheet, which means we're adding a chart object to that worksheet. So we've got a worksheet with a chart object, and there's going to be a chart inside that chart object. So we're doing a chart objects.add, and we're doing a continuation, which is a space and underscore, and we're specifying the left of the chart is going to be located at 330. The width is going to be 750. It's going to be from the top down is only going to be 10, and the height is going to be 580. So that gives us the dimensions and location of the chart. And then we're going to take that and do another with statement. So it's chartObjects.chart, and we're going to specify the chart type is XL, and it's XY scatter lines, no markers. Again, you can choose whatever kind you want. There's many, many different types. But we're going to do XY scatter lines, no markers. And we're going to set the source data as source : equals chart range in. And that's what we calculated, those two columns that we input from the user. And then the parent name is going to be chart1. You can name it whatever you want. We're going to say has title equals false and has legend equals false. You can add titles and legends and whatever you want. There's many other parameters you can specify with this chart, but we're just making it very simple. And then we're going to end both with statements, and that's it. At this point, we have specified the range, called this function with the ranges, and calculated the actual range of data in those columns. And then we have just defined a chart with that source data. So now we'll run this. We got the spreadsheet in the background, and here's our IDE, and we'll go up here and press the play button, and we get our user input box, and we will select the first column, hit OK, second column, C, and you can see it automatically charts, and we're all done. Now we can add to this. In the future, we're going to get some more detail on these user interface controls. There's many of them we can look at. And we're going to look at some other stuff with VBA. So if you like any of these videos, I encourage you to hit the like button, subscribe, hit the bell notifications. But most of all, please let others know that we're here so we get some views. Really appreciate it. Otherwise, take care. Have a really good day. Thanks.